Chris Carter here, the Locked On Steelers podcast. Russell Wilson says he's in talks with the Steelers about a new contract. We dig into those comments with Nick Farabaugh of PennLive.com and what that means or what it doesn't mean about the Steelers quarterback room moving forward and what they need to change in the run game. All here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL and you will win $50 instantly for playing just $5. PrizePicks, run your game. As I said before, we're joined by the man himself, Nick Farabaugh. He's back from PennLive.com. We always love having Nick on the show. Nick, we got to jump to the big news, and that's Russell Wilson appearing on the Pat McAfee show, and he basically details, floats it out there that he is in talks with the Steelers for a future contract. He says, quote, "I got so much more in me, man. I'm excited. Obviously, my goal is to be with the Pittsburgh Steelers a long time and hopefully finish my career here. Pittsburgh is a special place for me. I love it, and hopefully I can play there a lot longer." He said, yes, we have started to talk a little bit. Obviously, we had our meetings and everything else and kind of just getting into it, not detailing everything, not floating everything out, not putting all the details out there. And this doesn't mean it. But Nick, I have a few reactions to this. One, I don't know if Russell Wilson saying this means that it's actually happening. It could just mean that, like, hey, they engaged in talks at the end of their meetings, is saying, like, hey, we're interested, you're interested. Okay, let's approach that. I don't think it guarantees that he's coming back, but it does point to the idea that the Steelers, are keeping their options open. I talked about this with Mark Caboli, with Alan Saunders. I think the majority opinion of most of us who cover the Steelers is that the best move is probably just to go with Russ and see what Justin, and go with that, and go with him and kind of roll with him for the long term, or at least for the short term, to try to say, hey, he's your bridge quarterback, build about around a young, mobile guy, considering how the year ended. But if you go with Russ, I feel like you are really signing up for needing to knowing that you need to have things situated a lot better than you did last year around him. And that to me just seems like there's got to be something else there if it's not.
It feels like that with either of these guys, to be quite honest with you. This roster needs a big-time bolstering around these guys, so you can either, one, evaluate Justin, or two, get the best play out of Russ. Whichever one you want, that needs to happen. But I do think these comments don't necessarily guarantee Russ is back. I felt like that was like a very common reaction. I was like, oh my goodness, the Steelers are interested in Russ, but they aren't interested in Justin. My guess is if they're engaging in talks with Russ, they're also engaging in talks with Justin Fields. I think that's a pretty easy leap to make. You got to see what Russ wants, first of all, right? What if Russ is willing to come back on $10 million? I mean, if he doesn't want a Baker Mayfield contract, if he doesn't want 20, what if Justin wants 20, right? Like, that's all these different factors that we can't know. We're not super privy to unless we hear them at some point. You have to take into consideration. I think keeping Russell Wilson, Justin Fields as open marks makes a ton of sense. And listen, you guys, that are watching this episode are probably going to be like, but both those guys have warts. They're not perfect quarterbacks. It's not the most enlightening thing, right? It's not, oh my goodness, yes, this is the guy of the future on either of those accounts. But here's the thing. Look at the market. We've talked about this before. The market is just so barren. If you're going to go with an older guy, why not just go with Russ, who already knows the offense? And there's really no younger guy with upside like Justin Fields that's going to be on the market. Right. So the only other guy that maybe you make a run on is Sam Darnold, but I think we saw at the end of his season that might have been a flash in the pan. And that's kind of my big thing is I don't want to pay Sam Darnold that much money when I don't think he's going to sustain that level of play. He was in a perfect environment with great receivers, a tight end, running backs, great offensive coordinator, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just look at this and say, okay, I think Justin or Russ is going to be the answer to who the starter in 2025 is. And so I just think this is the start of that. But if they bring Russell Wilson back to your measurement, they need to get better receivers. The offensive line needs to take a step up. And more importantly, and I think the most important thing, this run game needs to start clicking a little bit more, because Russell Wilson's best seasons in Seattle came when Marshawn Lynch was running the rock and he didn't have all the pressure placed on him.
That to me is where I think things falter the most down the stretch. If Russell Wilson has a run game, things might be different for the offense as a whole. And that's not to say that like Russell Wilson, should have that makes it okay that he didn't play well down the stretch. But that to me was the biggest thing that fell out in the end for Russell Wilson. But here's the other thing: if the run game develops, I also think Justin Fields can work with that run game, because whereas I think Justin doesn't see the field as well as Russ does right now. Maybe he will get better at that with another year in your system. But what he does bring is that athleticism, and then how he can buy time and how he can make plays. And when he can make plays with his legs, you see, I mean, look at what the Ravens are able to do. And again, that's Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. That's the extreme on both ends there as far as talent wise. But the threat of the running quarterback opens up chances to run the ball. And we saw that with Justin Fields early in the season when they were able to break some runs off against the Raiders. And I believe who was the second team they played there? There was another team in that stretch that they ran the ball well against. But point being, I think getting better offensive line play, getting a better run game for the whole season makes both of these quarterbacks better, because it would make any quarterback better. But the question that you have to ask the Steelers is what's the better? And I think one thing to kind of note here about how Omar Khan, Mike Tomlin, everyone's trying to handle it in this front office, they probably are talking to both guys. Why? Because I think they realize what happens when you put all your eggs in one basket. When you put your eggs in the Kenny Pickett basket and basically it was him or nobody else, you put yourself in a rough spot. And then at the end of the season, Mason Rudolph's your starting quarterback, and then he doesn't want to stick around, and then you're back to square one. I think what they're doing is they're playing the field. They're seeing how things work out in trying to talk to both of these guys, and knowing that if they get one of them or both of them, they now have a better idea with how to build around them. But to your point, Nick, I think if they're doing this, Justin Fields should be the priority. But I also think the other priority here that you brought up there is money. They need to be able to get one or both of these guys without tanking their much of their salary cap, because they need defensive tackles. They need another offensive lineman, maybe two. They need another receiver, maybe two. They need help in the secondary. There's a lot of different additions, and they need to add to the running back room, and we'll get to that later. But that to me is another part of the trickiness of this. Is not only do you need to decide which one wants to stay with you the most, but you also need to decide or find out what's going to be the cost to keep either of them, because that has to be brought into consideration as you continue to rebuild this roster.
Right. And I do think the right answer is to sink the money around the quarterback. I think it's time to sink money into the offense. I've often thought, it's the highest paid defense in the NFL. Sometimes was a little bit of a misnomer, because 5 years ago, the Steelers had the highest paid offense in the NFL, and it was imbalanced, right? So what the Steelers need to do this offseason is they just do need to spend money on the offense, right? Because usually these high bucket free agents, whether it's a T. Higgins, it's a Chris Godwin, it's a Trey Smith. I'm just naming big offensive names that are going to be on the market. If they sign these guys, it's a deep infusion of talent. I think that's something that they just need around, whether it's Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. I also, and this is another thing I would like to see, regardless of which guy comes back, I would also like to see an infusion of money into the offensive coaching staff. And what I mean by that is I would like to see one or two new coaches, maybe a veteran coach that can come in and give a little fresh idea. Because Arthur Smith's going to be back. With him losing on the Jets and the Bears job, he'll be back. But I would like to see a veteran coach come in, maybe bring a new vision. Same thing on the defensive side of the football. But I think offensively, that really kind of rings true. I would like to see that come about. And so I think when you look at the quarterback situation, they not only need to figure out who's the best fit, what do we want, but we also need to figure out, okay, how can we surround this guy with the perfect ecosystem? Because the ecosystem for Russ versus the ecosystem for Justin, I think looks different. I think it does. It does. If you're bringing Justin back, you're going to want that offensive line piece a little more, I think. If you bring Russ back, I think bringing another deep ball receiver then kind of catapults a little bit higher than maybe it would. If you have Justin, I think you could sign different other archetypes of receivers. Specifically, right. I would maybe prioritize Yak a little more with Justin. So I just think there's different things that they kind of prioritize, and there's targets on both these fronts for them to look at, but I think it depends. And so I think this is just the start of laying out that board, laying out that plan. And I think it doesn't necessarily signal just because Russ said, we're starting talks, that he's necessarily going to be coming back, but understand the Steelers have a different vision, a long-term vision that they have to build, and that's part of it.
Absolutely. I want to talk more about that vision and what they do around either of these quarterbacks and how they would handle this next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Nick Farabaugh, stick with us. We will be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also sponsored by Talkspace. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, communicate more effectively, but finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge. Well, that's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace is the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours, and it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. Therapy has done wonders to help me re-examine and reorder my life. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL. Enter promo code SPACE80. To match with a licensed therapist today, again, go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL. Use promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL. Promo code SPACE80. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Nick Farabaugh of PennLive.com. Nick, let's talk more about what the Steelers would be doing here. Another thought that I had here, and again, I think this is a long shot, but I wanted to poke your brain on this because it popped in my head. What if they're in talks with both and they sign both, but there is not a guarantee this time around that Russell Wilson is going to be the starter, where it's like, hey, last year it was more so we were trying to just see what Justin could give us while Russ was hurt. And then when Russ came back, it was his job. What if what you're saying is, no, Justin, we're going to give you the shot this year to run the offense. Russ, you're here in case of an emergency. Take this paycheck and be with this organization that appreciates you and don't make this a scene while we do this. But I wanted to gauge your thoughts on what would you think about bringing both back, because there's the other thought that you could bring Justin Fields back, and if he gets hurt, you at least have a veteran behind him. The question behind that, though, I think also is how much would you be able to pay both, and would Justin stick around if Russell was still on the roster?
I think if Russ is the starter, is the guy with pole position, Justin's going elsewhere. There's just going to be options on the market. I mean, the Jets, the Titans, the Raiders. These are just a few teams that are going to target him if he hits the market as a guy that could maybe be a bridge upside option. It's just going to happen. There's just not enough quarterbacks in the draft for, I think Justin's going to find a spot where he's going to start most of the year if he doesn't start here. And so I can't see that arrangement. Now, I think the interesting arrangement would be Justin starting with Russ as the backup. I think
that's what I'm saying right there. That's the thing that I think.
Here's the thing with that, Chris. I think that is one that is going to crop up later in the process if it happens. You know what I mean? I think if that happens, if Justin comes back and is a starter, I think you sign him early, maybe even before he hits the market. And then Russ comes back April, May, because there's no market for him. I think Russ is going to test the market at that point. So I think it would work at that point because clearly Russ will have been shown that the market is not strong. I don't really see a scenario where both these guys just kind of lock up, really early in free agency. The one that doesn't come back early to me is going to test free agency and see what that market is. Maybe it's not as lush as they think. Maybe they come back. That's the scenario to me in that scenario. I don't see a scenario where they both get signed by March 20th and we have that situation because I think Russ is going to then want to wait out and see who can I start, in Las Vegas? Can I start in New York? Can I start wherever, right? I just think that's a part of that equation. And so I'm interested to kind of see how that would work out. But my feeling is, and it has been for a pretty long while, honestly, since the season's ended, Chris, is that it's one or the other. I don't really see a likely scenario outside of the one I just detailed where we get both these guys back. I do very much think it's going to be one or the other, and the backup's going to be some veteran that's been around, a Marcus Mariota, a Jacoby Brissett, a Cooper Rush, someone like that, or it'll be a younger guy that maybe they draft. I don't know. You know what I mean? I think that's the scenario here for the backup. I see many scenarios where both these guys come back. I think it's kind of waiting the water.
I agree with you, and that's why I said I think this is a long shot, but I think that's the thing here is that the priority should be to try to re-sign Justin Fields. And if you can get back Russell Wilson, great. But I think that his youth and so it's something that you can still work with and develop. I think that Russell Wilson, I mean, ultimately it comes down to where both of these guys want to play, right? Like, again, if Russell Wilson, is the guy that wants to stay, and Justin just is like, you know what, I just want to go somewhere else. There's nothing you can do about that, but you can go out there and make a priority. And again, what are you going to pay these guys before they hit the market to keep them from getting there? And I just think that if you're bringing Russell Wilson back, there needs to be an understanding, like, buddy, there needs to be some major discounts here around that. And if you bring Justin Fields, I think there is a bit of understanding of that, but because, like you said, I think Justin Fields' market would be better than Russell Wilson simply because of age and the quarterback needy teams. And again, those quarterback needy teams, that could want Justin could also want Russell. But I think with Justin's capabilities and his youth, more teams are going to be faster to pay him more money in the open market, which is why I think that Justin Fields should be the priority there. And that might be here or there. But to your point earlier too, I think that this also, either whichever one that you get, and this is why I think this needs to be top priority right now, is going to inform the other decisions that you make and how you want this offense to be specifically for next year. Either one, you need a better offensive line, you need a better run game. But the types of receivers that you have, the types of a system for those receivers to work, that could very well be a very different look. You could try to go get a Cortland Sutton, another George Pickens type, whether it's in the draft or in free agency, to say, hey, if it's Russell Wilson, we're getting to go up and get a guy. But if it's Justin Fields, maybe like you said, you get a shifty, a route runner guy, a guy that's quicker and is able to win in space more and present more bigger passing windows for Justin Fields to target. I think that's the tricky thing about this, is that you kind of have to have this understanding of where you're going to go. And it's going to take until a shoe drops in these negotiations, where it's not just, oh, they're in talks, or they're no, it's an actual, like, oh, this is where they're going. This is who they signed first. This was their priority.
Yeah. And listen, they have other things, like, for example, the coach I was talking about. If they want to hire a coach, maybe they hire someone a little bit more specific to the run game. If they have Justin, right, someone that is super flared in the quarterback run game specifically. If it's Russ, maybe you get a passing game specialist in there. Like, there's different things. All these factors come together. And they're going to need a running back. They're probably going to sign a veteran, because I'm assuming Najee Harris and Cordero Patterson will not be back. So you're probably going to want a rookie and a veteran. So what type of running back do you want with Justin? Do you want dynamic running backs? Do you want a power back, right? These different things. And so all of that kind of comes together when we're talking about this quarterback situation. So it is number one priority right now, because I personally, if I was Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin, I would not want to hit the opening day of free agency without knowing who my quarterback is. Yep. And I think it also, I would like to have this wrapped up before the combine, personally, because not only would it inform me what I would do in free agency, but also inform me how to spend my time in the draft cycle. We're talking about these receivers. Well, what would be the better fit for the Steelers? Would it be Matthew Golden or Luther Burden or Emeka Egbuka, right? These are, all three of those guys are different receivers. And so just because you have a lack of receiver talent doesn't necessarily mean you don't want to specifically draft for the quarterback you're going to have. And I think that's important to look at. So if it's Russ, as you mentioned, you would rather have a Cortland Sutton. If it's Justin Fields, though, maybe you want more of a Garrett Wilson, right? I'm just kind of throwing these out there, guys that have been involved in rumors. Like all these different types of guys that fit these certain things better. And so all of it kind of comes back to the quarterback situation. And, they need to build up this offense for that quarterback to succeed, whether it's Fields or Wilson. And that looks different. The maps are different to both those guys succeeding. They have the same needs, but as you mentioned, they need to map out a plan with these guys. And the guy that is at the top as the quarterback, they need a clear plan to fit that guy's strengths if they want to break this playoff drought.
Agreed. And again, like, I don't think either of us is saying this is the thing that they can do to be a Super Bowl contender next year. This is more so about setting yourself up with the best position to be competitive next year, build something forward with the guy on your roster, so that eventually when you're ready to go get that quarterback for the future, for the longer term, if Justin Fields doesn't work out in that sense, then you have a system built for that guy to fit into in that situation.
100%. I think I've said this before. I think this offseason is as much setting up 2026 to be the offseason you can go get that guy. I think if you want to have that O-line, the receivers, everybody in place for a rookie, right? We talk about it all the time. How can there be an ideal system or situation for rookies to walk into? That is how you do it. You build it up around them. And if Fields isn't the guy, then that sets you up for the move to say, okay, we're going to go get the guy in 26. I think that's a long-term view, but I think that needs to be what the view is for the Steelers organization.
Agreed entirely. I want to talk about how they can build this run game a little bit better, or what kind of run game the Steelers will have next season, because Najee Harris is set to be a free agent. And I think that opens up some talks there. We'll do over those talks and what to expect there next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Nick Farabaugh, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 back in bonus bets if you win on your first $5 bet. That's right, $300 in bonus bets for just making a $5 bet. If the FanDuel app gives you everything you need, from live bets to same-game parlays and so much more. The conference championship round is set. The Eagles have moved up to 6.5-point favorites at home over the Commanders. They started the week as 5.5-point favorites, but the Chiefs are still steady as a 1.5-point favorite over the Buffalo Bills, the game at Arrowhead Stadium for Kansas City. Where will you put your money? Be sure to do so and start your season with a big return on FanDuel today. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com to grab your $300 in bonus bets if you hit on your first bet of $5 or more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Nick Farabaugh of PennLive.com. Nick, I want to talk to you about the Steelers running back room specifically. We've talked a lot about the offensive line and what they can do better there. But let's say the offensive line takes a step up. They're not just average, they're more above average this next year, and you see improvements there. What's the kind of running back room that you need with this team to succeed? Because right now, Jaylen Warren's under contract, but Najee Harris is not. And it looks like he's going to hit the open market. We'll see where he goes from there. But like, if you looked at the open market of what running backs would be in free agency, you got Najee Harris might be at the top of the list there, but you got Aaron Jones, who's 31. I don't know if you want that. A.J. Dillon, the former Packers guy, Nick Chubb at 30 with all his injuries, Javonte Williams, from the Broncos. There's all these guys that fit there, and you're asking yourself, like, do you want one of those, or do you want to reach into this really deep running back class in the draft and take advantage of that? My only thing there with Nick, is I think this team needs to get younger in a few other spots. I think they need defensive line help, corner help, and wide receiver help, and maybe even another offensive lineman for the future of Isaac Seumalo not working out. I think there's so many other needs, and to go after a running back again in the draft so soon, it makes me wonder about that. But what's your outlook as far as how the Steelers should approach the running back position this offseason?
I think they're lucky. The running back class is the deepest running back class I can remember. There's 30-plus guys that might have draftable grades. That is legit, by the way. That is not an over-exaggeration. There are so many talented players of different archetypes. So you might be able to get a legit guy in the 6th round. So they might be able to wait and still get a guy. I look at this free agent crop of running backs, and compared to what I think is a great draft class, this running back class sucks in free agency. There's really not a lot of guys. One guy that I did kind of look at that I thought was a little interesting was Kenny Gainwell. He's a guy that hasn't had the starting role in Philly and won't because Saquon's there. I wonder if maybe you could kind of coax him over to Pittsburgh to pair with Jaylen Warren. Him and Jaylen Warren are really similar, but I also think they're the type of backs that kind of fit Arthur Smith's scheme. I kind of want somebody, though, if I were looking for the Steelers, I would want somebody with speed. I want somebody that hits home runs. I think that's what they kind of need out of this element, because whatever they have at quarterback, I think if you have Justin Fields at quarterback, his explosive ability at quarterback, he can hit the home run. I think having a running back that could do the same thing actually is really interesting. And so if we're top of the draft, guys, Travion Henderson would be a really interesting player. He can hit the home run. But I'm thinking, someone with speed that can really kind of complement Warren, because Warren's got the burst and he can hit big plays, but he's more of a bounce off the tackles guy, 20, 25 yards with good burst and pretty solid long speed, but not elite long speed. But if you have that really elusive guy that just breaks open big time runs. I think that could be a real boost to the Steelers. I don't necessarily think they need power. I don't really think you need it when you run outside zone, mid zone, and wide zone as much as Arthur Smith does. And if you want to run all those gap stuff, Jalen Warren's a really good gap runner. And so I think that they have options there of what they want to do. Specifically in the running back room, but I'd be looking for speed. I think that's kind of what they need because they have the receiving third down ability of Warren.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they could very well extend Warren this season, this offseason. I think that would be a prudent move to keep that and the rookie together as a 1-2 punch. And so I think you look at speed. I think that's where I would go.
See, here's the thing with the speed move, and I agree. Like, it'd be nice to have two home run hitters that you could exchange off of and both be dangerous in your offense. But here's my other thought: here is part of what made Jalen Warren, more accessible and a better part of the package was that you had a guy to take the pressure off, not the pressure, but take carries off him, so he wasn't overloaded every single game. That you weren't, wearing him down throughout the season, and he could bring you fresh legs in that burst of speed. And there were so many important carries Najee Harris got over his 4 years with the Steelers, where he would get the tough yards, he would hold on to the football, and he rarely fumbled. And that's something that I think people might undervalue. And it's something I said back when I did this show, and when they got rid of Le'Veon Bell and they did not get a replacement for him, James Conner. And again, I grew up in Pittsburgh. I've covered Pitt. I have a lot of respect for James Conner, but James Conner put the ball on the turf a lot in 2018 and a lot in situations that cost the team in close games, that cost them a playoff the playoffs that year. Fumbling the football had been an issue, and running the football had been an issue until Najee Harris came back around. And Najee Harris didn't make them a lead or anything like that, but those fumbles did not happen with him. They happened once every blue moon, and he was able to be that consistent workhorse that allowed for a Jalen Warren to come in and say, "Hey, you can come on, be the off pace guy." And I wonder if you get another speed back, will that put either or in a tough situation there, to be that sort of bell cow and to kind of take those tough carries and protect the football? Because I think that's the other priority that the Steelers need to look at when it comes to running backs.
Yeah, I do understand that. I mean, if we're really looking at the general aspect of what I'm kind of preaching, they just need to find a dude that fits the zone scheme that they're running. It's not a natural fit. Najee Harris is not a zone runner. He is a downhill gap runner.
Yeah.
And I think Jalen Warren, even to a degree at times, is kind of suited more for downhill gap stuff. He can run zone because he has really good burst, but I think he's kind of suited for that. And so, it doesn't necessarily have to be speed, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be 4.3 blazing speed.
Right.
It can be a guy that runs a 4.45 and is maybe a bigger back that's just really good in zone schemes. I'm thinking of a Caleb Johnson from Iowa, someone like that. That's a really good zone runner. And showcase that on his film. So I just think they need somebody that fits this scheme really well. Because I thought last year, at times, Arthur Smith was trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. I thought that was what it was at times with Najee Harris. And so I would look at a guy that I think can confidently run zone runs. And so if that guy's a little bigger and maybe doesn't have this 4.3 speed, I think that's fine. I think they just need something that is more dynamic out of the zone run specifically. And if that guy doesn't take 75-yard houses, but takes 25, 30 yards, I think that is also fine. If you want a Cam Scatabo, for example, who is a very similar player to Jalen Warren in a lot of respects, that's also fine. And so I think there's a lot of ways you can attack it. I think there's just a lot of speed in this class specifically, to where if you split the Jalen Warren and those carries up with that running back and you get to 25-30, can you take 15-15 or 10-10-5? I wouldn't be surprised if this is a double-pronged effort, Chris, where they go and sign a veteran, a cheap veteran, and then bring in someone in the draft. And we see a 3-tiered backfield, because we saw a 3-tiered backfield this year with Cordero Patterson getting some of those reps. But can you get maybe a bigger type of back in free agency? That could be something you look at.
Yeah, it could be something you look at. There's guys like Alexander Madison are going to be floating out there. Cam Akers is going to be floating out there. There's guys out there I think that you could sign and just be like, hey, you're here. And like you said, Kenneth Gain was another guy out there, not specifically a big back or anything like that, but I do think that there's options available to you there. And again, like the draft, it depends on where you go get those guys. Nick, if you're going at running back in this draft, and this is considering the other needs the Steelers have, where do you make that jump at running back when you look at the people who are available?
Yeah, I mean, it's deep. But it's also a deep corner and defensive tackle class, which I think is interesting, and it's not a deep wide receiver class, which kind of puts everything into perspective. I still think early day 3 makes a lot of sense. Round 4, round 5, somewhere around there makes sense for the running backs. There's going to be legit, round 3 talents in round 4 because there's just so many running backs in the class. It is a ridiculously deep class. And in that round 4, it's not like you're going to be left with big backs or speed backs. There's all different types of backs that you could tier down. And so that's kind of where I look at it. It's not the biggest need that they have this offseason. It's one of those needs. But, man, that value right there should be good because you can then, before that, get receiver, get defensive tackle. You can get an offensive lineman if you want. You can get, a safety even if you really wanted to, right? If you want a third safety. Like, there are different things you can do before round 4 or 5 that makes sense. I just don't think running back, in round 2 or round 3 makes much sense to me personally. They have bigger fish to fry.
And that's my thing is that I know there's some people out there that are like, go get Ashton Jeanty. And I'm like, whoa, buddy, relax. Like they got other, like you said, other fish to fry. And that'll also exclude you from an Omarion Hampton. That probably also excludes you from Cam Scatterbo. And I know those are the big names that everyone's going to want to talk about when it comes to adding at running back. But to your point, I think it's more of a committee approach that if you're not re-signing Najee Harris and you're sticking with Jaylen Warren, it's finding a veteran and a rookie that you can come in, develop, and see how he works in your system and see how explosive they are with the run game. That to me is where the Steelers should be looking at running back if they're looking to roll the dice and change some things up with that running back room. Because again, to me, it won't matter who they add to this roster if they don't fix this offensive line and make it a more efficient run blocking unit next year. If they have problems, it don't matter if they go get Ashton Jeanty or if they trade for Saquon Barkley. The run game is going to be a problem. They need to make sure that they fix both, which is again why I thought going into this past season, it would have made sense to sign Najee Harris to his 5th-year extension. So you're not tying yourself long-term to him. Would have been $6.5 million. That's nothing for a running back. And then this way, you're not worrying about running back at this stage of the season. Now you're saying, okay, let's fix these other things. Let's put everything we got into fixing, if you want to add another offensive lineman, if you want to fix the D line, if you want to fix corner, you can do all these things. It's just this is now added to your to-do list. And I'm not so sure that this is high up in priority enough for you to maybe fix this in one season.
Yeah. And listen, I'm looking at some of the round 4, round 5 guys they maybe could have a chance at. I mean, I think you talk about guys like Ollie Gordon, Dylan Sampson. If you're a Q's guy, LaQuint Allen's probably a day 3 fit that can be really interesting receiving back. Like there's just Devin Neal. Like there's just all these names that I think of that make sense in different ways. And so as we're talking about other needs, when I look at receiver and I go to day 3 in the same area, it's just not the same, right? Defensive line, even though it's deep, you want guys with high pedigree and you're going to get a lot of top 100 picks there. Same thing with corner. They need 2 corner positions. Like they need a slot and an outside corner.
I agree. So,
I think that's something, do you want to double dip at one of those spots, right? Do you want to double dip a corner, receiver, or D-line? I think those are realistic. And so I just look at where running back falls, and yeah, they need one. And yeah, it's a weak free agency class, which I think hurts the ability to kind of invest in that position because I don't think you necessarily want to pay a running back a lot of money, especially if you're going to do what I think they might do, which is extend Jaylen Warren. But I do think that they are lucky enough that this year, if they wait till round 5, they're probably going to find a running back that can legitimately contribute to their offense. And I think that might be the way they go about it. And I think that's the smart way to go about it.
Well, there you have it. We'll keep an eye on how these things progress. One more day this week, and then we will see. Hopefully, we'll get to see or learn soon when Art Reedy plans to do his end-of-year press conference about the state of the Steelers, and maybe we'll get to learn some of these moves that are coming on the coaching staff that have not been announced yet. We'll get to all that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast throughout, but you can also get it from Nick Farabaugh. Nick, thanks as always for joining us here. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, you can follow me on X, Twitter at FarabaughFB. Make sure to check the stuff out at PennLive.com. Make sure to check out the YouTube channel as well.
He's Nick Farabaugh from PennLive.com. I'm Chris Carter, your host. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, all the social medias. At Carter Critique. It's always the same handle. You can also find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of those daily episodes. We're back tomorrow with one more episode before the weekend here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.